Inside the cavernous, air-conditioned silence of the AT&T Stadium in Dallas, something felt fundamentally broken. The clock showed 22 minutes. The temperature was a perfect 70 degrees. There was no humidity, no fatigue, no medical emergency. Yet the referee blew his whistle, signaling a mandatory 3-minute cooling break. Players stood frozen, looking at the sidelines in a state of confused paralysis. The momentum of a high-stakes World Cup match didn't just stall, it evaporated. This was the moment the 2026 World Cup ceased to be a sport and became a controlled experiment. 6 nations have now reached their breaking point. This is not a typical grievance over a VAR decision or a missed penalty. This is a systemic rebellion against a new world order in football. We were promised the greatest tournament in history, a sprawling celebration across North America. Instead, we are witnessing a quiet, coordinated collapse of the game's traditional rhythm. Behind the scenes, coaches are fuming and captains are speaking out with a level of vitriol rarely seen in the sanitized world of FIFA press conferences. They arrived to compete for the gold, but they found themselves trapped in a laboratory. To understand the scale of this crisis, we have to look at the numbers. FIFA didn't just tweak the rules for 2026, they overhauled the biological clock of the sport. The headline change was the mandatory cooling break. In previous tournaments, like Brazil 2014 or Qatar 2022, these were emergency measures used only when the wet bulb globe temperature hit dangerous levels. In 2026, the emergency became the standard. Whether you are playing in the sweltering heat of Monterrey or the climate-controlled dome of Vancouver, the match stops twice every half. Didier Deschamps was the first to strike. The French manager, a man who has seen everything in football, refused to play the diplomat. He watched his side lose their attacking shape in a crucial opening match because of a break that neither team wanted. Deschamps pointed out the obvious. Football is a game of endurance and psychological pressure. By inserting these artificial pauses, FIFA is effectively turning 90 minutes of flow into 4 quarters of scripted content. You cannot build pressure if the referee is required to let the air out of the ball every 20 minutes. The frustration felt by Deschamps was echoed by Netherlands captain Virgil van Dijk, but Van Dijk took the criticism a step further, touching on the nerve that FIFA hoped no one would mention. He looked at the television monitors during one of these breaks and saw something telling. As the players stood around drinking water they didn't need, the broadcast cut to a series of high-priced advertisements. This wasn't about player welfare, it was about creating inventory. In the American sports market, a game without commercial breaks is a missed revenue opportunity. By mandating these pauses regardless of weather, FIFA essentially sold the soul of the match flow to the highest bidder. Van Dijk's assessment was blunt. The players are being used as props for a 3-minute commercial window. This is the central tension of the 2026 World Cup. Every rule change seems to have a dual purpose: a public justification of speeding up the game and a private reality of increasing control and commercialization. Take the new substitution laws. FIFA introduced a mandatory 10-second window for a player to leave the pitch. If the player exceeds this, the incoming substitute is barred from entering for a full 2 minutes of play. It sounds efficient on paper. In practice, it is a disaster. We saw this play out in the match between Japan and Iceland. Isak Thorvaldsson was waiting on the touchline, ready to impact the game. His teammate, exhausted and limping, failed to clear the far touchline within the 10-second countdown. The referee, bound by the new rigidity of the law, forced Iceland to play with 10 men for the next 2 minutes. Japan capitalized, scoring a goal that changed the trajectory of the group. The punishment did not fit the crime. A technicality over a stopwatch outweighed the sporting merit of the contest. Norway's Ståle Solbakken highlighted the sheer hypocrisy of this speed-up initiative. FIFA has introduced 5-second clocks for throw-ins and goal kicks, threatening yellow cards for any delay. They are obsessively counting seconds to keep the ball in play. Yet, they simultaneously mandate 6 minutes of total stoppage for cooling breaks that serve no physiological purpose in half the venues. The logic is eating itself. You cannot demand frantic speed from the players while the governing body forces the game to a dead halt for corporate reasons. It is a contradiction that has left the world's top tactical minds in a state of utter bewilderment. But if the timing rules are a nuisance, the new disciplinary codes are a direct assault on the players' humanity. This tournament saw the debut of the officiating law, a rule that makes it a red card offense for a player to cover their mouth while speaking to an opponent or an official. The stated goal was transparency and the elimination of hidden abuse. On the surface, it seems noble. In reality, it has turned every confrontation into a potential dismissal. Miguel Almiron became the first casualty of this new era. In a moment of high tension, a reflex as old as the professional game itself took over. He put his hand to his face to whisper a comment to an opponent. There was no violence, there was no mass confrontation, but the cameras caught the gesture, the VAR intervened, and Almiron was sent off. The Paraguayan bench was in shock. How do you tell a professional athlete to abandon a lifetime of muscle memory in the middle of a World Cup? The rule assumes that every whispered word is a slur. It removes the right to privacy on the pitch. It treats players not as emotional human beings in a high-pressure environment, but as performers in a reality TV show where every syllable must be captured for the microphones. Ecuador's Piero Hincapié suffered a similar fate, dismissed in the dying moments of a match for a gesture that wouldn't have even earned a talking to 3 years ago. The game is being sanitized to the point of sterilization. Then there is the walk-off rule. Inspired by chaotic scenes in regional tournaments, FIFA decreed that any team moving toward the touchline in protest would face immediate draconian sanctions, including potential expulsion from the tournament. It was designed to prevent teams from holding the game hostage. But it has effectively stripped nations of their only leverage against officiating incompetence. When a team feels the system is rigged or the VAR is failing them, they are now legally required to stand still and accept it. They are participants in a play they are no longer allowed to critique. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes, it was exactly how the system was designed to work. The 2026 World Cup is the first tournament designed entirely for the viewer rather than the spectator. There is a distinction. A spectator is someone who experiences the grit and the tension of the stadium. A viewer is someone consuming a polished media product. By breaking the game into segments, penalizing invisible communication, and forcing a frantic pace punctuated by long pauses, FIFA is rebuilding football in the image of the NFL or the NBA. They are seeking a predictable, high-scoring, broadcast-friendly product that fits perfectly into a predetermined time slot. The logistical reality of this tournament has only added to the sense of a controlled collapse. Iran's Mehdi Taremi spoke for the smaller nations when he described the tournament's organization as a disaster for the players' bodies. With matches spread across 3 massive countries, some teams are facing 4-hour flights and multiple time zone changes between group games. The football family that FIFA loves to mention in their brochures has been divided into the haves and the have-nots. The elite teams with private jets and massive recovery staffs are surviving. The others are being ground down by the sheer geography of North America. Taremi pointed out that while FIFA was busy worrying about whether a player covered his mouth, they seemed completely indifferent to the fact that his squad was spending more time in airports than on the training pitch. The logistical pressure is a quiet killer of quality. When players are exhausted, the game slows down. When the game slows down, FIFA introduces more rules to artificially speed it up. It is a cycle of intervention, that ignores the root cause. The tournament has become too big, too corporate, and too distant from the physical reality of the sport. Spain's Luis de la Fuente tried to maintain a diplomatic front, but even he couldn't hide his frustration with the lack of flexibility. He noted that the referees have become automatons. They no longer feel the game. They are managing a checklist provided by Zurich. If the rule says a break happens at 22 minutes, it happens, even if a team is in the middle of a breakaway. If the rule says 10 seconds to leave the pitch, the card comes out, regardless of whether the player is bleeding or just slow. The common sense that once governed the relationship between officials and players has been replaced by an algorithm. This loss of human intuition is perhaps the most damaging aspect of the 2026 experiment. Football has always been a game of gray areas. It is a game of interpretation. By trying to turn every action into a binary legal or illegal event with a corresponding time limit, FIFA is stripping away the narrative tension. We are no longer talking about the beauty of a passing move or the bravery of a defender. We are talking about clocks, sensors, and mouth-covering regulations. The rebellion of these 6 nations, France, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Paraguay, and Ecuador, is not just about rules. It is about the definition of the sport. They are fighting for the right to play a game that feels authentic. They are pushing back against a version of football that feels like it was designed in a boardroom by people who have never felt the weight of a wet jersey or the silence of a losing locker room. The irony is that FIFA's attempt to protect the game's image is the very thing destroying it. By penalizing every minor frustration and orchestrating every pause, they have created a tournament that feels hollow. The goals are still being scored, the stadiums are still full, but the soul of the competition is being stretched thin. You can feel it in the way the fans react. There is a lag in the stadium, a hesitation. People are waiting for the whistle to blow for a reason they don't yet understand. As the tournament moves into the knockout stages, the stakes will only get higher. A mandatory cooling break in a semi-final could decide who goes to the final. A 10-second substitution error could end a nation's dream. A red card for a covered mouth could become the most infamous moment in a country's sporting history. The rules have become the protagonists. The players have become the variables. We are watching the dawn of content football. It is a version of the game optimized for social media clips and advertising blocks. It is shiny, it is fast, and it is controlled. But it is also fragile. The rebellion we are seeing now is a warning. If the people who play the game and the people who coach the game no longer recognize the sport they love, then the governing body has failed its primary mission. You can have the most expensive stadiums in the world and the most sophisticated broadcast technology ever devised, but if the game on the pitch feels like a scripted simulation, the audience will eventually look away. The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be a milestone for the growth of the sport in the Americas. It was supposed to be the moment football truly conquered the final frontier. Instead, it might be remembered as the moment the sports leaders flew too close to the sun. They tried to engineer perfection and ended up producing friction. They tried to eliminate controversy and ended up creating a new, more clinical form of it. The final whistle at the MetLife Stadium will eventually blow, and a champion will be crowned. The history books will record the scores and the scorers. But the story told in the tunnels and the training camps will be different. It will be a story of a tournament where the grass was perfect, the lights were bright, and the rules were a cage. The players will return to their clubs, the fans will go home, and the circus will pack up and move on. But the trust between the governing body and the people who give the game its life has been profoundly shaken. FIFA has the power to write the laws, but they do not have the power to force people to believe in them. The rebellion of 2026 is a reminder that football belongs to the flow, not the clock. It belongs to the player's whispers, not the camera's microphones. It belongs to the heat of the moment, not the coolness of the commercial break. The game is still there, buried somewhere under the layers of new regulations and corporate demands, waiting to be let out. As the sun sets over the final venue, a lone groundskeeper walks the pitch, the silence finally returning to the grass. The billion-dollar screens are dark, and the frantic countdowns have stopped. We are left with the image of a game that has been redesigned, repackaged, and sold back to us, leaving everyone wondering if we can ever go back to the way it was before the clock started ticking for everyone. Is this still the game we fell in love with? The silence is the only answer.